All right, guys. So the second part of our reading today is analyzing a model paragraph. So tomorrow, Tuesday, you will be taking your mid-unit assessment already. I know we just took 2 assessments. I know we just took one last week and we took one the week before, but you're already ready to take this mid-unit assessment for the second unit. I'm going to read to you what that mid-unit assessment is, and it's a very simple one. This is it right here in front of me. Front and back page, that's all it is. The directions say, throughout Units 1 and 2, you have been reading Love That Dog and thinking about what inspires Jack to write poetry. Now you are going to write an informative paragraph to answer the question, what inspires Jack to write poetry, and where can you see evidence of this in his poetry? Use details from the notes you color-coded in class to explain your thinking. We will be color-coding today together. But that is the prompt. The back just has you, it says, look over your notes, think about what inspired Jack. You're going to plan your paragraph, so kind of in your head. Think about what you're going to say. And then you will write a paragraph. And then you will go ahead and go back through and revise your paragraph based on those first 3 rules. And you're going to put a check mark through them, but we'll go over that more tomorrow. And so you just have those lines, not a whole lot that you need to write that I'm expecting of you. Remember, a paragraph is at least 3 to 5 sentences. You guys are in 4th grade now, so we really should be aiming for that 5 sentences. Just like with any essay, we're looking for 5 paragraphs, 3 body, 1 introduction, 1 concluding. We should think about that with our paragraph as well. 3 body sentences, 1 introduction sentence, 1 concluding sentence. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and look at a very strong paragraph today. This paragraph is in your packet that we started working on Friday. I forgot to bring home my typed up packet, so I have a blank one, but everybody's is now filled in. We did that on Friday. We have a couple more poems that we'll put in. Jack's My Sky poem, and then the one we read today about, what I think he called it Love That Dog, and it was inspired by Walter Dean Meyer. So go ahead and turn to the 3rd page. If you don't have this packet out real quick right now, go ahead and pause, grab the packet so you can follow along with me. You also should have out in front of you red, green, and purple colored pencils. These are my colored pencils, so please make sure that they make it back to the substitute teacher. She will pass those out. I know how many I put in the bag, so please make sure you get them back. I do not have colored pencils. I have markers because one of my cats stole one of my pencils and I can't find it right now. So you're going to have to bear with me. I'm going to read this model informative paragraph with you. Remember, an informative paragraph, informative. You guys have written informative papers before in 3rd grade. I know because I came to your wax museum and you guys were very informative. So, informative paragraph, you're teaching something or telling about something that you know. You're informing people about what you know. Model informative paragraph. And Love That Dog by Sharon Creech. Even though he doesn't understand poetry at first, the main character, Jack, is inspired to write poetry. Jack was inspired by things that happen in his classroom, and you can see this in his poetry. For example, on November 6th, he writes a poem about how he likes his poems typed up on blue paper and hung up on the yellow bulletin board. On January 17th, he writes a poem about how people write to make pictures with words, but other people think they are poems because of the way they look. Also, on April 4th, he writes poetry to thank his teacher for typing up his poem. Another example of Jack being inspired by things in his classroom is the poem he writes on April 17th, when his teacher persuades him to write to Walter Dean Myers. Jack shows us that inspiration for writing poetry can come from many different places. That was such a strong paragraph for several reasons. First, it went ahead and named that title, the author, right away. That was the first words. That's what we've been working on in our summaries. And then it goes back to specific page numbers. And remember, in Love That Dog, while it might not look like a poem, that whole entire book was written in verse. We called that free verse because it didn't always rhyme and it didn't always look like a poem, but it was written in verse, meaning it was truly a poem. So pulling those dates, that's very specific. We could find in our book, it might not say the page number, it just says the date. But if we went back in our book, we could find where November 6th was, where January 17th was, and find those. It's talking about the poems that looked like the shapes. So we had the dog poem written by Jack. We had the apple poem. And then it talks specifically about Walter Dean Myers, which is really the big overall gist of the book of what Miss Barber thinks made Jack really love poetry was when he found that one book that he just truly connected with. So what we're going to do now is, since you've read that poem, go ahead and take a minute and that paragraph. Go ahead and take a second, reread it to yourself, and just think about how strong that truly is. That is a really, really strong paragraph. We're going to go ahead and take our colored pencils and we're going to analyze this paragraph. And analyze means that we're going to look at the paragraph very deeply, in a very structured way to see what makes it such a great paragraph. So go ahead and grab your red colored pencil. Where it introduces the book and the author, and it briefly explains what the paragraph is about, go ahead and underline that in red. So once again, where it introduces the book, that would be telling what the title is, telling us who the author is, and telling us a little bit what the book is about. Underline that in red. The next part, it clearly states a focus about what inspired Jack and stays focused on throughout the piece. Underline that in green. So one more time. Clearly states a focus about what inspired Jack and stays focused on that throughout the whole entire piece. So what inspired Jack, and make sure that it stays focused on that same thing throughout the whole entire paragraph. And I see a sentence that begins with Jack was inspired by. So that would be my clue of that's what inspired Jack. So we're going to underline that in green and anything else that goes along with that. What was Jack's inspiration? You should have underlined a lot in that time. Next, uses accurate and relevant details and examples to develop the topic and includes details from Jack's poems and explains how each detail is evidence of what inspired Jack. Underline that in purple. Some of this you may re-underline because I'm going to re-underline something that I've already underlined. So that's fine. Uses accurate, so that means on point, it's specific, it's true, it's the right answer. Accurate and relevant, so that means it's on topic. Relevant details and examples to develop the topic. What is the topic we're talking about? We're talking about Jack. We're talking about what inspired Jack to write poetry. And then the details of evidence. So underline that on purple. For a lot of this, I'm making my line a double line now because I've already underlined a lot of this in green. So I'm re-underlining it in purple. And finally, we're going to go ahead and go back to that green pencil. Provides a concluding sentence that restates the focus. So that concluding sentence, you want that strong introduction sentence that grabs everybody in and makes them want to read what you've written. And then your concluding sentence at the end of your paragraph goes all the way back to that beginning of your paragraph and restates or retells, maybe in a little bit different words, exactly what you said in the beginning. So if we reread this last sentence together, it says, Jack shows us that inspiration for writing poetry can come from many different places. Generally, your concluding sentence is always your last sentence, just a little giveaway. Because if you're concluding something, you're finishing up, you're ending it. So let's look at what we've done. So here is my drawing. I have the first sentence underlined in red. And Love That Dog by Sharon Creech. Even though he doesn't understand poetry at first, the main character, Jack, is inspired to write poetry. So it introduced the book. It said, and Love That Dog, so that's the title of the book we've been reading, by Sharon Creech, tells us the author, and then it briefly, very shortly, and to the point, told us what the book is about. Even though he doesn't understand poetry at first, the main character, Jack, is inspired to write poetry. Now I want to go down here to the bottom about that concluding sentence. So that in red, let's go back to that, sorry. That in red is an introductory sentence. You're going to need to know what an introductory sentence is, or what EL Education is calling it is a focus statement. So I'm going to write that up here in red, and I want you to write that in red too, right above. Focus statement, F-O-C-U-S. Then another word, statement, S-T-A-T-E-M-E-N-T. Focus statement. So, you know, in red, you read this focus statement. We were able to identify the focus statement. Then we will look down at that concluding statement or concluding sentence. It says, Jack shows us that inspiration for writing poetry can come from many different places. Which that beautifully wrapped up that paragraph because it gave us all in this purple. And I also underlined a lot of that in green too, which is fine. It went right back into the text and gave us different entry dates and different details about what inspired Jack and what he wrote about on certain days that supported Jack not loving poetry at first and then falling in love with it. So remember, up here at top, it's not always your first sentence, but a lot of times it is. It was either our topic sentence or what we're going to be calling it is our focus statement. Focus statement. And then concluding sentence. It restates the focus. So concluding sentence. All right. So I am going to end this video and I'm going to start a new one for the third part of our reading portion today. You will still need this out. You will also need a pencil. So please get that prepared and get ready to watch reading video number 3.